They never wanted you to hear this, not the way I'm about to tell it. Imagine, deep in the shadows of 1834 Virginia, a secret so vile it shattered the fragile illusions of an entire community. A secret buried beneath a simple farmhouse where 47 children were discovered. Chained, silent, broken. This was no ordinary tragedy, no random horror. It was the product of a calculated system of control, a labyrinth of darkness designed to crush not only bodies but spirits and keep the world blind to the truth. The Sullivan family, respected on the surface, hid a basement that was less a room and more a prison, a tomb for innocence, stolen and crushed. 47 children, 47 souls tethered to an unthinkable nightmare. But the chains you'll hear about aren't just iron and rust. They are chains of secrecy, corruption, and psychological domination reaching far beyond that basement's walls. This story will pull you down into the depths where history is not recorded by textbooks or monuments, but by silence, fear, and the slow decay of human dignity. You'll learn about how power manipulates truth, how institutions bury their sins beneath layers of lies, and how those who suffer most become ghosts, forgotten by the world that promised to protect them. What you're about to see isn't for the faint of heart. It's a descent into a nightmare you've walked past all your life without noticing. Listen carefully, because once the ink stains your mind, the world you thought you knew will never look the same again. This is not just history, this is a warning, a call to awaken, and the basement door has just been unlocked. The Sullivans were pillars of their small Virginia town, a family name whispered with respect and unease, the kind of reputation built on old money and older secrets. No one questioned the creaking farmhouse on the edge of the woods, where the children were said to play and laugh like any other, but the truth hid beneath layers of dust and denial. You see, power thrives on appearances. It needs a mask to survive. The Sullivan family's reputation was the perfect camouflage for something far darker, an engineered system of control where the basement wasn't just a room, but a carefully constructed tomb. The discovery was accidental. A tip from a neighbor, a faint cry in the dead of night, and the law came knocking. What they found inside was beyond comprehension. Children, many barely alive, chained in fetid darkness, stripped of their names, identities, and voices. These were not just captives, they were experiments in terror and submission. The chains weren't just physical, they were psychological shackles hammered deep into their minds. Their eyes held stories of rituals they were forced to endure, whispered commands that broke their wills, and a silence that screamed louder than any cry. The Sullivan basement was a crucible of human cruelty, but it was also a blueprint, an early model of how darkness spreads beneath the surface of society, how institutional neglect and fear allow horrors to persist in plain sight. And the worst part, the chains stretched far beyond that basement door. What if the real prison was not walls or locks, but the very systems built to protect? What if the children's suffering was a symptom, not the disease? As you descend deeper with me, you'll start to see the outlines of a grand design where power uses terror to rewrite the rules of control, where fear becomes the ink and the mind the page. The Sullivan basement was a shadow world, and it's still here, lurking behind everything you think you know. Do you want to see what lies beneath? As the officers pried open the heavy wooden door to that basement, the air that rushed out was thick with decay and despair. It was a suffocating breath of a world no child should ever inhabit. Inside, darkness clung to every corner, swallowing what little light dared to enter. The sound of chains dragging against cold stone echoed, a metallic symphony of captivity and broken dreams. 47 children, some barely old enough to speak, were found in a state that defied explanation. Their clothes tattered rags, their bodies wasted from starvation and neglect. Their eyes, hollow, haunted, searched desperately for a trace of mercy or hope, but all they found was cold concrete, iron shackles, and silence. The officers, unprepared for such a sight, moved slowly, carefully, as if breaking the spell might shatter the fragile threads holding the children's minds together. They lifted the smallest ones into their arms, babies who had never felt a mother's warmth, toddlers who had never known freedom, and older children whose spirits had been battered into submission. The scene was a jarring confrontation with the deepest horrors of humanity. Whispers spread through the town like wildfire. Neighbors refused to believe what had been hidden in their midst. How could this evil thrive so close, unnoticed? How had no one seen the chains beneath the laughter? The Sullivan family's house, once a symbol of rural prosperity, was now the epicenter of a nightmare that rippled through generations. The community's collective ignorance was shattered, replaced by a creeping guilt that clawed at their conscience. News traveled fast, but the official reports were sparse, sanitized, a shield to protect reputations and prevent the truth from infecting the fragile social order. The children became shadows in history, their screams muffled by bureaucracy and silence. But you, watching this now, are invited to remember what others were forced to forget, to see beyond the surface, beyond the lies, to understand that the basement was not just a physical prison. It was a symbol of a much larger, darker system that controls through fear, secrecy, and manipulation. The chains may have been broken, but the legacy of that basement lives on in the forgotten, the oppressed, and in the structures that still hold us captive today. The chains weren't just metal links forged to bind flesh. They were instruments of total domination, carefully designed to erase identity and will. In that basement, control wasn't accidental. It was ritualized, systematic, a psychological war waged against innocence itself. Every shackle, every rusted cuff was a tool to crush hope, to silence the mind before the body even dared to resist. The children were broken down slowly, piece by piece, stripped of names, memories, and the simple right to exist freely. They were taught obedience through terror, forced into submission by hunger, isolation, and the relentless whisper of authority. This wasn't mere imprisonment. It was a carefully crafted control system, one that echoes through history in every dark corner where power hides behind cruelty. The Sullivan basement was a crucible for a broader method, using fear to fracture identity, to create hollow shells that obey without question. Consider this: when a mind is starved of light, love, and language, it becomes a blank slate. And on that slate, those who hold the chains write their will, demanding silence, compliance, and surrender. The children's chains were physical, but the true bonds were invisible, etched deep into neural pathways by trauma and terror. They learned to dissociate, to become ghosts in their own lives, forever trapped beneath the weight of unseen shackles. This system of control wasn't unique to the Sullivans. It's a pattern repeated throughout history in orphanages, prisons, and even modern institutions, where the machinery of psychological torture is disguised as discipline or protection. The basement wasn't just a room beneath a house. It was a blueprint for how darkness burrows into society, how power corrupts not only the powerful, but those they seek to dominate. The children's suffering was a language, a code of warning for anyone who dares to look deeper, to question the narratives handed down by those who write history from thrones built on blood and silence. The chains rust now, but the system they represent still holds men and minds captive. What you're hearing is not a story frozen in the past. It is a key to unlocking the cages around your own mind, a call to break free from the chains you don't even see. And that awakening begins here. The silence those children carried was heavier than their chains. Their voices, once bright and innocent, had been suffocated, erased by a deliberate campaign of fear and isolation. What remained were whispers, fragments of memories buried so deep they barely surfaced, even when the basement door was ripped open. They didn't just endure captivity, they endured the slow erosion of self. Imagine a child who has never heard their own name spoken aloud, who has never felt the warmth of a gentle touch, who only knows the cold bite of iron and the endless dark. These were not mere victims. They were living testaments to psychological annihilation. Some remembered faces, shadowy figures who came and went, murmuring threats and commands in voices as cold as the stones around them. Rituals, punishments, unspoken rules etched into their survival. Their days blurred into an endless void where pain was the only constant. But even in the deepest darkness, faint sparks of resistance flickered. A glance exchanged, a whispered hope, a remembered dream of sunlight and freedom. These tiny acts of defiance were dangerous, yet they were the only thing keeping some part of their humanity alive. The community outside had turned a blind eye, choosing comfort over confrontation. But the children's silence screamed louder than any voice could. Their trauma was not isolated. It was a mirror reflecting a society built on complicity, where silence is currency and the powerful trade in secrets. These broken souls carried with them a warning, a truth most were too afraid to face. The basement was more than a prison. It was a laboratory for psychological control, a dark chamber where innocence was methodically dismantled to serve a system that profits from obedience. And this system did not die with the closure of that basement door. It evolved, hiding in new forms, institutions, governments, ideologies, always seeking to chain minds, not just bodies. The children's stories, whispered in shadows, demand to be heard. Their pain is a map, a guide through the darkness that still envelops society, the anonymous society. If you are listening, it means the chains have begun to loosen. The next step is to see the patterns hidden beneath the surface, to recognize the signs of control in the world around you. This knowledge is dangerous, yes, but it is also liberating, because to awaken is to break free. And the basement was only the beginning. The Sullivan basement was not an isolated atrocity. It was a symptom of a dark and twisted network that extends far beyond a single farm in 1834, Virginia. Behind that decaying farmhouse was a web of power, influence, and secrecy, carefully spun by those who understood the value of control over truth. Landowners, local officials, and shadowy figures in positions of authority were complicit, whether through active participation or willful ignorance. They upheld a system where the vulnerable could be locked away, silenced, and erased without consequence. These weren't careless mistakes or failures of oversight. They were calculated acts of institutionalized cruelty designed to protect privilege and maintain a social order built on suppression. The chains that bound the children also bound the hands of justice, the mouths of witnesses, and the eyes of the community. Each link was reinforced by threats, bribery, and an unspoken agreement to never ask uncomfortable questions. The Sullivan family was a pawn in a larger game, a game where land and labor were currency and human lives were collateral. But the true puppeteers were those who thrived on ignorance, keeping the dark secrets locked beneath polished floors and smiling faces. This was a society willing to sacrifice its youngest and weakest to preserve the illusion of order and progress. And this sacrifice was hidden in plain sight, protected by a code of silence so strict that even the law became a weapon of oppression. Look beyond the basement walls and you see the architecture of power itself, built not on justice or mercy, but on fear, deception, and ruthless control. And the chains that once held those 47 children are mirrored in the invisible bonds that still shape the lives of millions today. Chains of poverty, indoctrination, and psychological manipulation. Understanding this hidden agenda is not just about history, it's about recognizing the forces that shape your world right now. The same mechanisms that locked those children away are still at work, molding minds, enforcing obedience, and silencing dissent. To awaken to this truth is dangerous because it means seeing the world without the comforting veil of lies. But it is also necessary because only by acknowledging the darkness can we begin to dismantle it. The basement door may have closed, but the system it revealed is very much alive. And your journey through the shadows is just beginning. Behind every secret basement, every shadowed corridor where horrors linger, lies a silent network of minds trained to suppress, to manipulate, and to control. The Sullivan basement was no accident. It was a product of a calculated system that thrives on fear and obedience. In 1834 Virginia, the chains that held those children were not just metal. They were shackles, forged in the crucible of social order and institutional corruption. The powers that be, local magistrates, church leaders, and wealthy landowners were not blind to the abuse. They were either complicit or utterly paralyzed by the weight of their own self-interest. Control was the currency. The basement was a dark echo of a wider psychological war, where domination was hidden beneath the guise of law, religion, and civilization. The Sullivan family's heinous acts were enabled by a broader system that weaponized silence, silencing victims, silencing witnesses, silencing conscience. The children's chains were extensions of a social order that demanded submission, obedience, and the erasure of pain. This was a culture that thrived on compartmentalization, where evil was parceled off and hidden beneath layers of propriety and denial. A culture that permitted horrific abuse because to acknowledge it would threaten the entire fragile facade of power. The basement was a stage for a dark ritual, a demonstration of how easily humanity can be corralled into compliance when fear becomes the master's voice. But what does this mean for you? It means the chains have never been just physical. They are mental, emotional, spiritual. The same invisible chains that held those children in that basement hold millions today, whether in jobs, relationships, or belief systems designed to control and limit. Recognizing this is the first step in breaking free. The basement door is a metaphor, a symbol of the hidden prisons in our own minds and societies, and only by stepping into the darkness, by facing the horror head-on, can the chains begin to loosen. This truth is uncomfortable, yes, dangerous, but it is also liberating, because knowledge is the hammer that can shatter these invisible shackles, and it is time to swing that hammer. Now imagine for a moment what it truly means to be erased, not just physically trapped, but mentally undone. The children of the Sullivan basement were not merely prisoners of iron chains, but captives of a broken system that sought to obliterate their very sense of self. Their minds were molded by isolation, their identities dissolved by calculated cruelty, designed to strip them of any hope of resistance. This is the terrifying power of psychological control systems, dark arts of the mind that enslave without a single lash, without a single visible chain. It's a control so insidious that it can transform a child into a ghost, a man into a servant, a society into a herd. The Sullivan case offers us a brutal glimpse into these mechanisms, exposing how fear becomes a weapon wielded by the powerful to keep the masses compliant. These are lessons hidden beneath the surface of history's sanitized pages, and these lessons still apply today. The children's shattered minds were the product of a relentless campaign of terror. Deprivation of light, sound, affection, every basic human need systematically denied. In this void, the mind turns inward, creating prisons within prisons. But this is not just a relic of the past. Modern institutions, governments, and media use similar tactics, cloaked in the guise of order and protection. Information is rationed, narratives are controlled, dissent is punished, not with chains and shackles, but with isolation, censorship, and psychological manipulation. The basement, then, is a symbol, a warning that the greatest prisons are invisible, built not with bricks, but with lies and fear. And if you are listening closely, you will see the patterns emerging in your own life and in the world around you. Do you feel the weight of invisible chains? The mental shackles forged by doubt, distraction, and deception. To break free, you must first recognize the prison. That begins with understanding the darkness that lies beneath the surface, the basement beneath our society's polished floorboard. Because only when the light reaches into that darkness can the chains begin to fall. And you, now aware, hold the power to make that light unstoppable. What you're beginning to see is the architecture of control. Not just in one house, one basement, one century, but a blueprint repeated across time and place. The basement where 47 children were chained was more than a crime scene. It was a symbol of a system designed to fracture humanity itself. Imagine a vast, invisible fortress built not from stone or steel, but from fear, manipulation, and silence. This fortress is the heart of every institution that claims to protect but instead enslaves. Every government that promises freedom but manufactures consent. Every ideology that demands loyalty by erasing individuality. The children's chains were physical, but the chains that bind you, the chains binding entire societies, are far more subtle and insidious. They are the fears whispered into your mind, the lies you accept as truth, the narratives designed to make you small, compliant, and unseen. Think about it. How often are you fed half-truths, distractions, or outright deceptions that shape your perception of reality? How often do you sense there's more beneath the surface, but you're told to look away, to trust the system, to obey without question? The basement is a metaphor for the buried truth society refuses to face, truths locked behind doors, sealed with denial and fear. These truths are dangerous because they threaten the very foundations of power. To acknowledge them is to start unraveling the web of control that traps millions in lives of quiet desperation and silent obedience. The children's chains clanked loudly in that basement, but society's chains rattle in whispers in education, media, politics, and culture. They echo in the structures that shape your beliefs, your fears, your very identity. This is not conspiracy theory, it is reality masked by convenience and complacency. And now, here you are standing at the threshold of forbidden knowledge, the edge of a rabbit hole few dare to descend. But descending you must, because above all else, the basement demands a reckoning. It demands that you see the chains for what they truly are, tools of a system that profits from your submission. and that seeing is the first strike against them. Once you understand the depth of this darkness, you cannot unsee it. You cannot return to ignorance. The basement door has opened, and you are the one who holds the key. Use it wisely. By now, you should sense that this story, the Sullivan basement, those 47 chained children, is more than just a grim chapter in history. It's a mirror reflecting a deeper, more sinister truth about the world we live in and the forces that shape it. It's the truth that real power doesn't announce itself with fanfare or violence. It operates quietly, invisibly, like poison seeping into the bloodstream. It is maintained through control of information, manipulation of fear, and the systematic erasure of dissent. And the basement represents the physical manifestation of this power, a place where control was absolute and resistance was crushed beneath the weight of cold iron and darker intentions. But consider the modern world. The walls have changed, but the chains remain. They are crafted from propaganda, social conditioning, and psychological manipulation. The people who run the system understand that controlling the narrative is the key to controlling the masses. If you control the story, you control the truth, and by extension, control the very reality people believe in. The Sullivan basement was a secret until it was uncovered, but what about the secrets that remain buried? What truths have been deliberately hidden from you? Not with chains and locks, but with laws, media, and carefully constructed illusions. This is the forbidden knowledge, knowledge that can unsettle everything you think you know about freedom, justice, and power. And here is the most dangerous part. Once you know, you can never unknow. The chains that once bound those children are the same chains that keep millions compliant today. Chains of ignorance, fear, and manufactured consent. But with awareness comes power. The power to question, to resist, to dismantle the invisible prison walls built around your mind and your life. It's not easy, it's not safe, but it is necessary. And this is your invitation to step beyond the comfort of ignorance, to see the world in its raw, unfiltered truth, and to take your first steps toward true freedom. Remember this moment, because what follows will change you forever. You see, the Sullivan family wasn't an isolated sickness. They weren't an anomaly, they were a symptom. One node in a vast and ancient network designed to exploit, to dominate, to harvest the vulnerable under the pretense of righteousness. In 1834, they operated in secrecy beneath a house of respectability. Today, these systems operate beneath entire governments, beneath the surface of institutions you've been taught to trust. Churches, schools, corporations, even the so-called charities that mask their true purpose behind smiles and tax exemptions. Understand this. Chains evolve, they adapt. What was once iron and rust becomes algorithm and addiction. Where once they needed basements, they now use screens. Where once they needed locked doors, they now use locked minds. And the children, they never stop targeting the children. Only now it's not about physical chains, it's about psychological cages, medicated, indoctrinated, rewired to obey, to consume, to never question why. Ask yourself, how many rooms are there now beneath schools, beneath facilities, beneath your very assumptions of safety, where experiments continue? How many basements remain sealed, evidence scrubbed, stories erased from history before they can surface? You don't have the answers because you were never meant to ask the questions. But here's the truth they don't want you to grasp. The Sullivan basement wasn't buried because it was horrifying. It was buried because it was effective, because it worked, because it revealed too much about how obedience is manufactured and how the innocent can be broken, reshaped into silence. Look around you. Countless are still chained. Not with manacles, but with debt, distraction, fear of being cast out. Most will never realize it. Most will defend their captors to their dying breath. That's how deep the conditioning goes. That's how complete the manipulation becomes. But you're not like them. You wouldn't still be here if you were. If you understand what's unfolding, if you see how far the chains reach, comment this now. And no more chains, no more lies. Say it twice below. Write it twice to mark this moment. Lock it into your mind. Lock it into the algorithm. You are not just watching this story, you are leaving something behind. A former self, a former ignorance, because from here on we go deeper, and there's no coming back. The question isn't whether there are more basements like the one beneath the Sullivan home. The question is, how many levels deeper do they go? Power, real power, doesn't stop at what you can see. It drills down beneath perception, beneath history, beneath even memory itself. It rewrites the past to control the present. It crafts horrors and then buries them beneath layers of misdirection and time, knowing that most men will never dig deep enough to uncover the rot. That is how control survives across generations, not by hiding the truth, but by drowning it in distractions. Think about this. In 1834, chains and locked doors were enough. But now, they've refined the formula. They've weaponized convenience, pleasure, even identity itself. They've sold you the lie that you are free, while your every action feeds a machine designed to keep you docile. You are tracked. You are studied. You are studied. Your fears are harvested like crops in a field, and your desires are fed back to you through screens and speakers until you mistake your programming for your own thoughts. This is how they've transformed the entire world into a prison without walls. A prison where the inmates build their own cells, decorate them, and defend them from anyone who dares to expose the truth. The truth. And beneath this digital labyrinth, the old methods still persist. Quiet, brutal, efficient. Children still disappear. Secrets still fester beneath foundations. Deals are still struck in dark rooms with blood on the floor and chains in the corner. The Sullivan family wasn't unique. They were a glimpse, a fracture in the surface that let a sliver of darkness bleed through. A warning ignored. A lesson buried. And if you think the people responsible were punished, think again. They weren't erased because they failed. They were absorbed because they succeeded. Their methods refined, their blueprints folded into the greater machinery of control that still hums beneath your world. You are starting to see it, aren't you? The patterns, the repetitions, the echoes of ancient cruelty dressed up in modern disguise. Do not look away now. You are closer to the heart of it than most ever get, and what comes next will demand more from you than belief. It will demand your transformation. It will demand your awakening. You've likely felt it already. That pull beneath the surface of ordinary life. A hum beneath the noise. A shadow beneath the light. Something older than language. Older than governments. Older than even the concept of morality itself. Humanity itself. The Sullivan basement wasn't just a crime scene. It was a ritual site in a much larger design. A design that spans centuries, continents, bloodlines. What happened beneath that house wasn't random, it was patterned. It followed laws older than any written by man, laws of fear, submission, domination, and transformation through suffering. The children weren't just victims, they were offerings, symbols, proof of concept for those who believe power is something you must take, not something given. Think of this. Why children? Why always the young, the innocent, the unformed? Because they are blank slates, because they are pure potential. Because if you can break them, you can shape the future itself. You can seed obedience so deep that it passes through generations, like blood through a vein. This is why institutions target the young through education, through entertainment, through medicine. Not to nurture, but to shape. Not to protect, but to program. Beneath the Sullivan home, the chains were iron. Above ground, today's chains are policy, law, expectation, shame. Different tools, same purpose. Break the will. Erase the self. Replace it with a manufactured identity that serves the machine. Do you understand now why these truths are hidden? Why history books skip over the Sullivan basement with a whisper? If at all, because the story didn't end, it evolved. And the people in control cannot afford for men like you to see the full shape of it. They want you docile, distracted, powerless. They want you asking the wrong questions, chasing the wrong enemies, fighting over scraps while they rewrite reality in dark rooms with locked doors. But you're here, you're listening, you're beginning to remember something you were taught to forget. The world is not what it seems. The rules are not as you were told, and the forces pulling the strings behind the scenes do not serve justice, truth, or freedom. They serve themselves, they serve hunger, they serve an ancient will that has always been at war with your awakening. Brace yourself. The descent is far from over. It's easy to comfort yourself with the belief that monsters no longer exist, that the Sullivan basement was an isolated pocket of madness in a more primitive time, that such things couldn't possibly survive into the present day without exposure, without punishment. But this is the final trick of control, to convince you that evil must wear horns and speak in obvious threats. The truth is far colder, far quieter. The monsters learned long ago to wear suits, to sit behind desks, to smile for cameras, to speak of progress, equality, and safety while tightening the noose one regulation, one headline, one algorithm at a time. Understand, Power didn't retreat into basements because it was weak. It retreated because the deeper it burrows, the less likely you are to look for it. And while you argue over politics, trends, and false crises, the real architects of your prison continue their work, patient, methodical, generational. How many missing children have been erased with paperwork? How many have vanished into facilities that will never appear on any map? How many have been sacrificed, not just physically, but spiritually, to sustain systems that demand obedience through fear, through trauma, through blood? The Sullivan family wasn't punished because they were monsters. They were punished because they left a crack in the facade. They exposed too much. They reminded people that behind the curtain of civility, the machine of domination still feeds on flesh and silence. That children are currency. That pain is power. But even now, in boardrooms and basements alike, the ritual continues. It's no longer about chains you can see. It's about breaking minds from the inside out, about forging compliance through terror wrapped in science, through hopelessness wrapped in progress. And those who control it, those who pull the strings, they are not individuals anymore. They are institutions, bloodlines. Names etched into history, not for their philanthropy, but for their mastery of control. If you've come this far, understand. There is no rescue coming. There is no cavalry on the horizon. No one is coming to save you. You must save yourself by seeing clearly, by resisting silently, by reclaiming your mind before it's too late. Because what waits beneath the surface is not finished. It watches, it adapts, and it will not stop until every man alive kneels, chained not by iron, but by his own illusions. The Sullivan family wasn't acting alone. That's the part history conveniently omits. Neighbors whispered, yes, but no one intervened. Officials suspected, yet no one acted. And when the truth finally surfaced, 47 children chained beneath the earth, there were no riots, no reforms, no reckoning. Only silence, only the rapid surgical burial of facts beneath legal jargon and sealed archives. Why? Because exposure wasn't just a risk to the Sullivans, it was a risk to the system itself. A system that depended, and still depends, on the complicity of those in power to maintain the illusion of normalcy, who ensured that their deeds remained hidden until it was too late to truly matter. These questions go unanswered not by accident, but by design, because those answers would reveal connections to orphanages, to asylums, to government programs masked as charity, masked as care, connections that reach far beyond Virginia, far beyond 1834. Patterns repeat for a reason. Look at history through clear eyes. How often do you find stories of children disappearing only for records to vanish, evidence to dissolve, and witnesses to fall silent? How often do you hear of basements, tunnels, secret rooms beneath institutions meant to protect? These are not isolated horrors. These are symptoms of something far older, far deeper. The Sullivan basement wasn't discovered. It was allowed to be discovered because by then the damage was done, the utility exhausted. The perpetrators either vanished or were absorbed into larger networks where their methods could be refined, sanitized, rebranded. And the children. Those who survived learn a truth that few dare speak aloud. The world does not protect the innocent. The world feeds on them. Even now, those basements exist. They've just evolved. They look like rehabilitation centers, research facilities, even entertainment venues. But beneath the surface, beneath the smiles and funding and headlines, the same rituals persist. Domination, control, exploitation. Not always with chains, but always with cruelty. If you think this ended with the Sullivan family, you're still living inside the narrative they built for you. The machine doesn't discard what works, it perfects it. And unless you learn to see it, unless you learn to read between the lines of history and power, you'll never understand how close you've always been to those chains. Those chains. Consider this carefully. 47 children don't simply vanish from society without assistance, without complicity. You must ask yourself, who looked the other way? Who stood to benefit? Who ensured silence? The Sullivan case exposes something far uglier than individual cruelty. It exposes the machinery behind the facade, the quiet cooperation between law, church, and wealth to conceal atrocities when exposure would threaten their shared power. And it's not unique to 1834. It's a model that repeats over and over beneath different names, beneath different faces. Beneath Catholic orphanages, beneath reform schools, beneath child welfare agencies run by smiling men in suits, Every era finds its own polite disguise for the same sickness. Because beneath civilization, this hunger persists, the hunger to control the weak, to own the innocent, to extract obedience through terror. This isn't theory, this is fact. Declassified reports from the 20th century reveal secret experiments on children in hospitals and institutions, orphans used as test subjects, their suffering justified by promises of science, of progress. Sound familiar? It should. The Sullivan basement was only the beginning of a long, uninterrupted chain, and chains, whether made of iron or policy, all serve the same purpose: control. Break the young and you shape the future. Strip them of identity, flood them with fear, and they will grow into men who kneel instinctively, who doubt their instincts, who never question authority again. That is the ultimate goal, not merely to harm, but to program. Ask yourself why these stories vanish from textbooks, from mainstream discourse, why the survivors are silenced, discredited, or discarded. Because if the masses understood the depth of these crimes, they might start asking bigger questions about their own chains, about the hands behind the curtain, about the basement still untouched beneath modern institutions. The Sullivan family was removed from the narrative not because their crimes were unique, but because they were sloppy, because they left evidence. The smarter predators learned from them, they evolved. They built their basements deeper, their walls thicker, their lies more sophisticated. And the children, they are still taken, not always physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually, shaped into cogs for the machine, taught to love their chains. Unless men like you wake up, unless men like you refuse to forget, unless men like you speak the forbidden aloud, you're beginning to understand now, aren't you? The Sullivan basement wasn't merely a physical location. It was an entry point, a threshold into something far more expansive, far more organized, and far more deliberate. This wasn't about one twisted family. It was about a system refining itself through blood, perfecting techniques of control beneath the surface of polite society. Ask yourself, where did the children come from? How were they acquired? Who ensured their disappearance raised no alarms? These aren't questions of coincidence. These are questions of infrastructure. The Sullivan family didn't operate alone. They were linked to networks, to supply chains of flesh that existed then and still exist now under different names, with greater sophistication, greater reach. In the decades that followed, these operations didn't vanish, they expanded. New basements were built beneath orphanages, beneath hospitals, beneath research facilities where paperwork replaced chains and pharmaceuticals replaced iron bars. Consent became manufactured through doctrine and diagnosis. The same objective remained: break the young, erase the self, forge obedience through trauma so profound it leaves no visible scars. But scars nonetheless. What do you think these children became? Most did not survive. Those who did were not released, they were repurposed, molded into instruments, into tools for furthering the very structures that broke them. This is how power sustains itself, not just by consuming the innocent, but by reshaping them into agents of the same darkness. Victims become enforcers, survivors become collaborators. The cycle continues because it was designed to. You've heard whispers of it. Project MK Ultra, state-sponsored experiments, vanished records, sealed testimonies. These aren't isolated horrors. They are the continuation of a methodology perfected in places like the Sullivan basement. Control through fear, manipulation through pain, compliance through shattered will. And still, society looks away, because to confront this truth would unravel too much. Trust in institutions, belief in authority, faith in progress. Easier to call it conspiracy, easier to dismiss survivors as liars or lunatics, easier to remain blind than admit the world was built atop these basements, atop these chains. But you are not like the others. You see now how deep this goes. You see the pattern. You recognize the design. And there is no safety in ignorance anymore. There never was. What waits beneath the surface isn't finished with us. It's evolving, watching, waiting for the next generation to be led quietly down the stairs. Look deeper and you'll see. The Sullivan basement was only the doorway. What lies beyond it stretches into institutions so vast, so respected, so embedded in the fabric of daily life that few dare question them. Governments, religious orders, academic circles, international charities, each cloaked in legitimacy, each with basements of their own, literal or metaphorical. Beneath the surface, beneath the propaganda, the same cold machinery hums forward decade after decade. The techniques change, the names change, the public faces rotate, but the purpose does not. Control the young, shape the future. Break them early and rebuild them to serve. If you still believe this is about isolated evil, you haven't been paying attention. This is about systemic design. Generational programming. Psychological warfare waged on the most vulnerable, those too small to fight back, too innocent to understand. Look at the statistics they don't want you to see. Look at the missing. Look at the lost files, the shuttered institutions, the charities caught trafficking, the schools with lawsuits sealed behind closed doors. These aren't anomalies. These are evidence of a machine refining itself beneath layers of legitimacy. Evidence of networks older than any government, loyal to no flag, bound by a currency far more ancient than money. Fear, silence, submission. And the survivors, most never speak. Those who do are silenced through ridicule, discrediting, or worse. The system protects itself. Whistleblowers vanish beneath scandals or suicides. Witnesses recant under pressure. Records burn in quiet fires. Still, the rituals continue. Still, the children are led below. Not always in chains, but through drugs, through screens, through ideologies designed to fracture the self and make them easier to mold. Once they were chained to walls. Now they are chained to algorithms, to pharmacopoeia, to cultural lies wrapped in progressivism. The method evolves. The aim does not. You must understand. This is not about the past. This is about the present. About how these hidden systems feed into everything from education to entertainment, steering not just individuals but entire generations toward compliance, dependency, obedience. Do not look for justice within the courts. Do not look for truth in the headlines. These institutions are part of the labyrinth, not the key to escaping it. You're already too deep to turn back. And ahead lies the heart of it. The reason why this darkness was born and why it will never release you willingly. By now, you understand this was never a story about a single family in Virginia. The Sullivan basement was just the mask, the symbol of something ancient, something still alive beneath the polished surface of modern life. What happened there was not the beginning, and it was never the end. It was merely a glimpse into the machinery of control that has operated, uninterrupted, through kingdoms, through governments, through corporations, through your very education, your very beliefs. What hides beneath the world you walk upon isn't just corruption. It's architecture. A labyrinth built generation upon generation, designed to extract not just labor, not just obedience, but your very will to resist. To hollow you out, to replace instinct with programming, questions with slogans, courage with fear. And this labyrinth begins, always, with the children. Chains are no longer iron, they are psychological. Basements no longer beneath floorboards, but beneath policies, beneath algorithms, beneath entertainment designed to condition, numb, and pacify. You're not living in freedom. You're living inside a machine perfected over centuries, one that smiles while it binds you tighter. And the architects, you will never see them fully. That's the point. They exist behind foundations, behind sealed doors, behind networks that answer only to ancient hunger, the hunger to dominate, to remake humanity in their image of control. They don't need you to believe this. They only need you to remain distracted, divided, and obedient. But you are here, listening, seeing, remembering. That alone separates you from the masses. That alone makes you dangerous. You may wonder, is there hope? Is there escape from this prison built beneath the world? The answer is brutal in its simplicity. Awareness is the first weapon, resistance the second, refusal the third. Once you see the chains, you can no longer be bound by them, not without your consent. That is why this knowledge is dangerous. That is why it has been buried, because men who awaken cannot be controlled in the same way. But awakening comes with a price. You will be isolated, ridiculed. You will see truths others cannot face. You will feel the weight of history pressing down upon your shoulders. Most turn back. Most return to their distractions, their comforts, their programming, but not you. Not now. You've already stepped too far into the darkness to pretend it isn't there. You've already heard the voices beneath the floorboards of history. There is no rescue. There is only the path forward. Alone, yes, but free. The Sullivan basement will never appear in textbooks as more than a footnote, if it's mentioned at all. Its true legacy lives not in history, but in continuation. In repetition, in evolution. Somewhere right now there are still children disappearing, still basements sealed, Still systems at work perfecting the process of erasure and obedience. This story wasn't about them. It was about you, about whether you would see the truth when it was laid before you, about whether you would recognize the chains not just around others, but around yourself. You have a choice now. Remain asleep, return to the comfort of the surface, convince yourself this was just a disturbing tale. Or carry this knowledge forward, sharpen it like a blade, and refuse to let the machine claim you quietly. If you've made it this far, comment below again. No more chains, no more lies. Say it twice. Lock it in. For yourself, for others who will find this and need to know they are not alone. The darkness survives because good men do nothing, but awakened men become dangerous. You've been warned, you've been shown. The rest is up to you. Welcome to the truth beneath the basement.